Let's talk about an Indian mound, shall we? This is an article that I recently found. It's one that I wish I would have found before I wrote my book. It certainly would have included it. I'm not sure why it didn't come up in my research. I'm guessing recent digitization in the Georgia archives. I know that they're still incorporating new newspapers. So anyway, what we have is actually a reprint. It was originally published in the Brunswick Times from Brunswick, Georgia, but we don't have any of the Brunswick Times newspapers from that like time period there. It was reprinted in the Savannah Morning News, and that's where I found it. So the article says, the oldest inhabitants well recollect, and some of them played upon, an Indian mound north of Brunswick. Its elevation was 6 feet from the surface, and in the center grew a large oak 3.5 feet in diameter, and on one side a pine 1/2 this size. The spot was a lonely one, and thousands of guesses have been made as to the contents of this knoll. It is now known what it contained. It contained the badly decayed frames of 5 humans, supposed to have been Indians. These bones were found standing erect, showing that the bodies had been placed upright. About them was a large circle of oyster shells, and inside of these shells and next to the bones was a heavy layer of charcoal. This the ancients used as a preserver, and well did it serve this purpose, as the large trees that had grown upon the mound showed that it had been made hundreds of years, presumably earlier, but they forgot that word. And still some of the bones were solid, while others crumbled when they came in contact with the open air. There was pottery in the mound. It shows very severe service, being badly burned. Pieces of this with some of the charcoal are at the Times office. But the most wonderful part of the story is to come. The mound contained one frame of a human who must have been a very near relative to old Goliath. This being was indeed a giant, such as is never seen these days. A measurement of the bones shows that this human was more than 8 and nearly 9 feet tall and heavily built in proportion. Down a leg bone of this monster had grown a huge root of a tree, and in the roomy skull was a peck of sand. The jaw bones of this skeleton are in very good condition and are now on exhibition at Dorflinger's on the bay. These bones will fit over the face of a man of today and have much vacant space left between. If a history of the day of this man, if it was a male, could be reproduced, it would certainly be interesting reading. The other skeletons found alongside of the giant are no larger than the people who now walk the streets of Brunswick. So very interesting article. Unfortunately, like I said, this is a one-off. It was a reprint. We don't have any more information from the Brunswick Times because we don't have the Brunswick Times. So if there was any follow-up about the different pieces of bone that were on exhibition, the pottery, etc., we don't have it. So do take this with a grain of salt accordingly, but I think that there's still stuff that we can ascertain from this. And I think that's still very interesting. So one of the first things I want to talk about is the fact that it's an upright burial. As far as I can tell, this is extremely rare in Native American burials. Going back before that, before, let's say, the tribes that were present at the time of colonization, that would be obviously harder to ascertain. But as far as like the archaeological work that's been done, the anthropological work that's been done on the Native American tribes, they really didn't do upright burial. So there was a shell mound down near Pensacola, I think it was. They thought they were upright, but actually they were sort of sitting, and then they had bones put into clay pots. And so it wasn't a truly upright burial. And then there was also a rumor that an Indian mound studied by Thomas Jefferson had an upright burial, but it also was not true. So really, as far as the mounds are concerned, this is the only one that I've been able to confirm that was fully standing upright. And it did specifically say that in the article, was standing upright, not just sitting upright or sitting on its haunches, right? Because those are two things that we do see in various forms of burial. And it makes sense. Like, why would you bury upright? Because, well, first of all, logistically, that would just be so hard, right? How do you keep your body completely upright while it's dead and you're backing dirt around? It'd be much easier to keep a body in sitting form and then you pack the dirt around it. Also, the fact that it was only a 6-foot tall mound, presumably the head of the giant wasn't sticking out of it, right? So you had to then dig down into the clay, the soil, the sand, in order to put the body down there in an upright position so that you didn't have too tall of a mound. And then, I mean, it's Brunswick, right? So you have a relatively shallow water table. Was he standing in the water? So it's very strange in that sense. It doesn't seem practical. And as far as the upright burial outside of a mound, the only people that I can tell definitely did this. There are some rumors that the Seminoles did it, but it doesn't seem like it was their regular practice. Their regular practice seemed more of like a funeral pyre situation. As far as I can tell, the only people that definitely did upright standing burial was the Mohawks of the Iroquois nation. Now, based on the size of the oak tree, you're looking at least 200 years old. Presumably, this would have been even older. Certainly, the other mounds in Georgia are accepted as being older than this. One other thing that I wanted to talk about in regards to the description of the mound is the shell circle. So charcoal does seem to be extremely common in burial mounds, especially because you have so many fire rituals that are associated with the burial process. And based on the burnt pottery that was in the mound and then the charcoal as well, it seems really no surprise that you would have the charcoal, because presumably that pottery was burned in some sort of burial rite. But as far as I can tell, the shell circle surrounding the bodies is pretty unique as well. So obviously tools, objects made out of shell were very common. I even saw one body laying down on a bed of shells, presumably a very prominent figure in the community. And so incorporating shells in a burial mound, common. But to surround the bodies with a circle of shells, I couldn't find any other example. And the thing about it that really struck me is that it almost strikes me as a protection spell of some sort. Is it a protection spell to keep them in, or is it a protection spell to keep them out? Hard to say, because I don't know that it was a protection spell. It seems like it's some sort of ritual to have the shells be inside of a circle shape. I could obviously be missing something. Like I said, I'm not an expert on Indian mounds by any stretch of the imagination, and I certainly don't have any degrees in archaeology or anthropology. But at least as far as I can tell, there wasn't too much that was similar to this. The other thing about it is that it doesn't exist anymore. So it's not like any true research could be done. And I wasn't able to tell where it was as far as actual location north of Brunswick. There is a neighborhood north of Brunswick that has a road called Indian Mound Road. That might be where it was, but it's not there now. It's covered in houses. So unfortunately, any scientific research and documentation, say by the American Bureau of Ethnology or the Smithsonian or anything like that, is completely out of the picture. We're working off one article, and it is what it is, right? But I do want to address giant skeletons. For example, in the Rockmart Cave burial that I discussed in my book, it was more than one giant skeleton. And in that case, it seems like, okay, you've got a community here. It also leaves open the possibility of a different species. When you've got one skeleton that is anomalous, surrounded by skeletons that are of normal human stature, it suggests that maybe we're looking at a medical anomaly. And in particular, when you're talking about them bragging about the thickness and the largeness of the jawbone. I mean, obviously, an 8-foot tall person would have a larger jawbone than me, right? Especially if it was a male. But when you talk about genetic condition or medical conditions that create giantism, generally speaking, you're associated with acromegaly, the growth of those long bones. And so you'll get the strong brow ridge, the very large jaw. A perfect example of this would be the Great Khali from WWE, Dilip Singh, better known probably by most of you as Turley from the Longest Yard remake. You can see just that strong brow, the strong jaw. He's perfectly human. He just has a medical condition. But if you were to see his skeleton and you're thinking in terms of a normal human skeleton, you may be thinking, well, this is a different type of human. And you're right, but not in the sense of a relict hominoid. The thing about giantism, particularly once you get into the realm of 8-9 feet tall, you're talking about a very, very small amount of people, historically and today. And it seems like looking at the last 200 years of giants, you're about 50-50 that person's going to be completely crippled. I mean, quite frankly, it's entirely possible that someone like that wouldn't survive. Robert Wadlow is probably the most famous giant, because he was the tallest man that's ever lived at 8'11", or at least the tallest man recorded, right, in recent history. He died at 22 from an infection because his knee braces or leg braces that helped him walk, because without them he would be crippled, rubbed a sore onto his leg. He got an infection because it was pre-antibiotics, and he died. The second tallest man ever, Bud Rogan, I think he was a black man from Tennessee or something like that. I had not previously heard of him until I did this research, but completely crippled. He was called the Goat Man because he rode on a cart that was pulled by goats. He lived longer than 22, but I'm not even sure you could have taken his body and actually made it go upright for this type of burial. There's just so many issues that come with that level of medical condition. Presumably this would have happened before the Spanish came through and accidentally brought smallpox to North America, because I don't see how Native Americans that were living in the 1600s having to deal with the after effects of now having smallpox would have survived with giantism, because it takes a while for them to actually get to 8-9 feet tall. I mean, they're not growing overnight. Sure, they're 6 feet by the time they're 7 years old or something crazy, but they still would have had to live into their 20s. And there's so many things that could have killed them before then. The other thing is that it may not have been 8-9 feet tall. Like I said, this was excavated by local enthusiasts, not scientists. Who knows that they laid out the skeleton correctly? There's cartilage in those joints, sure, but not 6 inches of cartilage. How do I know that they laid them out correctly? And one of those long bones was completely destroyed by a tree root, as it says in the article. So how do I know that they even did it correctly? It might have been big, but it might have been more like 7 feet, which isn't that anomalous. Certainly didn't need to be caused by giantism. There are plenty of 7 foot tall people right now. It's just about hygiene and nutrition. And certainly those things could have been managed prior to what we consider the modern day. Now, it's possible that this person did have a medical condition, and the other people within that burial were their family, and that protection ritual was to keep that medical condition from spreading to the rest of the community. Not that that's how giantism works, but it's possible that that's how they felt that it would work. The other thing I think that's strange is that, so in the last 200 years, there have been less than 30 men and only 2 women who have reached a height of 8 feet tall. Of those less than 30 and 2 women, none of them are Native American. So it doesn't seem like there's necessarily a genetic proclivity towards giantism within the Native American population. But it just seems strange that in a community that really isn't prone to giantism, we have these mounds where there seem to be genetic anomalies that create giants that don't show outward signs of disfiguring medical conditions other than the possible reality of acromegaly. It also seems strange that we do have some burials where there are more than one giant skeleton. It leaves me wondering about the possibility of hybrids. Based on the 3 types of relict hominoids that I feel definitively sure that lived within Georgia historically, I don't think the skunk ape type would be able to breed with humans. Gorillas, chimpanzees, etc. have 48 chromosomes. We have 46. There's no genetic compatibility there, even if sexual intercourse were to happen. Now, the Bigfoot type, unknown whether it be 46 or 48, right? Who knows if they're technically closer to human or closer to ape. Even still, I doubt there would actually be an opportunity for sexual interaction and intercourse, because universally in the articles, they're seen as monsters, basically. I just don't see it happening. I mean, obviously rapes happen today within humans, so I guess technically Bigfoot rape could have occurred, but it seems unlikely. Well, quite frankly, they had methods of abortion. If they felt that there was going to be a situation where a monster bred with a human, presumably they would have used some form of herbal remedy, let's say. That leaves Neanderthaloids. A Neanderthaloid is almost always in the historic accounts seen as human. They actually believed at the time that a human that went and lived in the woods would grow hair all over their body, lose the ability to speak or understand human language, and would go completely devolved human, past feral. And so that's what they thought Neanderthaloids were when they found them. They sent them to asylums, they sent them to jails, they sent them to poor farms. So really, at that point, you're less looking at a religious conundrum as far as monster with human, and you're more looking at strange human with human. And at that point, I think there's a fair chance that there would have been some procreation. Don't have any evidence for it, but I think it probably happened. There is plenty of speculation that those sons of God mating with the daughters of man in the Bible that created the demigods who were larger than human. There's plenty of speculation that would have actually been male Neanderthaloids or other form of wild man mating with human women. And the reason that the sons of God would have been the Neanderthaloids or the wild men and not what we would think of as the sons of God, like in the sense of like the Jewish tribes or something like that, would be because the wild men were bigger and stronger and faster and seemed to have superhuman qualities that led them to be worshipped as gods. For example, the original satyrs did not have goat legs. They looked like hairy men. So in that case, yes, the sons of God mating with the daughters of men could create a giant. At least according to the historical legends. You're probably not going to get a female wild man mating with a human male. It's possible, but probably not, because most of the sightings of relict hominoids are of males. Patty excluded, and a couple of other sightings excluded. I mean, we had one that I know of in Georgia that was a couple, a Neanderthaloid couple, but vast majority of all of the types of relict hominoid in Georgia were male. So you're far more likely to get a male relict hominoid and a female human who, I don't know, takes pity on them or fascination with them, or who knows. That's pretty much the only thing that I can think of that would create a giant human that really had no issues as far as lifespan, as far as really medical anomalies. So I feel like with these giant skeletons, we're in a situation where either we do have medical giants with acromegaly, and that just maybe wasn't documented well. You know, the anthropologists weren't calling the medical community to get them to look at the bones. You know, with some of these, the bones just dissipate in their hands. I'm sure plenty of the bones found their way into private collections and were never studied. I think we either have medical giants or we have some sort of hybrid. Unfortunately, like I said, we just don't know. We just don't know. We don't have the bones. We don't have any documentation of the bones. We don't even have other articles. So we're just left guessing, but it makes you think.